So for this next short series of boring but useful videos, I'm going to be talking to you about my methods for inspecting a car, specifically classic cars, but it'll also apply to any car. Most of the things will apply to any car. And then I'll also explain um, the general procedure and how to fix these things so that you can get the maximum performance and best experience from your classic car. It can change your experience from a nightmare to a pleasure. At least that's how it happened for me as well. So this is especially helpful if you're planning on buying a car. I've got a few potential clients and clients asking me about, when is it useful? When do you know when a project is doable? When do you know when a project is viable, right? And there are two basic concepts which most people are already familiar with, and that's money and time. If you've got a lot of money, then in most cases you don't have a lot of time unless you're really, really rich and maybe you received a $10 million inheritance or something like that. But if you've got a lot of money, then in most cases, or if you've got enough money, let's say enough money, in most cases, you've got a regular job, you don't really want to get into restoring a car. So in those cases you probably want to pay, either pay for somebody to restore a car for you, somebody that's got more experience and does that for a living, or you want to buy a car that's already been restored. Just adjust the camera here. So in any case, you will be faced with the decision, for which car to choose and how to choose the car. And for the other type of person, if you've got a lot of time, then that usually means you don't have a lot of money. And if you've got a lot of time, then you've got a lot of time to do your own thing, and maybe restoring a car is something that you're interested in. And if you're getting a project car, you will have to spend a lot of time. But the advantage of classic cars is that although you'll probably need a lot of time, you won't need a lot of money per se. But it's one of those things, they're always connected. If you're working, then and you're working, you're having to spend time at your work, and maybe restoring a car, like I said, is not something that's cost effective for you. And the same way, if you've got a lot of time on your hands and you're not working, then maybe you're losing money that way. And so this all depends, like I said, this all depends on how much money you make, and it ultimately is an individual choice. But with this video, or maybe these videos, I'd like to show you how I make a decision on which car to buy, which project is doable, and which projects, which cars, which things I'd stay away from. At which point you say, okay, this is not going to work, I'm going to stay away from this car. At which point you look, hey, it's a good project, it's something good to do. And then afterwards, like I said, I'm going to explain what are the solutions, how I generally go about it. But the two concepts are still the same. If it takes a lot of time to repair a car, then the costs are going to be high. The more time it takes to fix a car, the higher the cost for you, the client or buyer, right? And the more parts are missing, same thing, the more costly it is going to be. So I guess the first thing to decide is, are you a collector or are you somebody that's actually going to drive the car? So if you're a collector, maybe you want a car that's rare. So there are some cars with only a few of them still remaining. And you might be thinking, well, it's a rare car, so it's a good buy. It might be a good buy as a good purchase, or it might be a good buy. Just, you're gonna spend too much money or too much time on it, and it's not gonna be worth it. So I've seen a few different classic car shows where people are getting $100,000 for a car, and I'll admit that when I first started working on these cars, I sort of had that illusion in mind. But in most cases, it is too good to be true, and some things are only possible on television. Or in case you're lucky enough to find anybody willing to spend, $100,000 on a car. In most cases, that won't be true. And I've seen a lot of deals that are indeed too good to be true. Rare cars, only 200 of them made. It's a really good deal, and there are really significant downsides to that. So there are cars that are worth a lot of money, but they're only worth a lot of money if you actually sell them. If they're just lingering around, then you've spent a lot of money fixing them, and you can't sell it, even if it is worth that much. Then you're stuck with a bit of a problem in most cases. There are some people that don't care. They'll throw $40,000 at a car because it's got some sentimental value to them. And once again, that's different, right? There are people that only care. They really want to keep the restoration 100% original, so they want the exact same material used, the same make of light bulb used originally, and they're 100% strictly original. And once again, it's a very, when you're into that kind of restoration, you're into a very selective public. You're into a very small, select number of people, which consequently means that it takes a lot of time for you to sell a car like that, if that's your plan as well. So you have to keep that in mind. And with a rare car, a lot of times, obviously, you have to do some research. But a lot of times, parts for these cars are very expensive. And if you're buying a car that is rare, if you've got a lot of money, then you'll already get a nice car that's fairly decent. And I'll get to defining that in a bit. But you get a car that's half destroyed. Can you really bring it back to life, even if it's a 1969 Mustang? If it's half chopped off and only half of it is there, you are going to have to spend a lot of money, because we are actually going to have to build a car. And I've come across some clients that were interested in that kind of thing. What I like, what's commonly called as a frames-off restoration, or even to a point where you're actually making the car. So if we're having to make a chassis, if we're having to make parts, adapt parts, if we're having to buy another windshield, or make a door, that's obviously going to cost more. And in those I've done other videos that I don't want to overlap on the other videos, but that it's very useful for you to watch my quote guide video to give you an idea of how much that costs. But so those are things you have to keep in mind. So that being said, I always, in terms of cost, if you want to save money, and the better deal is a complete car. I always advise people to stay away from cars that are not complete. When I say not complete, I mean, it's missing an engine, or it's missing a transmission, it's missing an axle, or it's missing a body, or it's missing a chassis. Those are things that I consider the car to be incomplete. And in some cases it won't matter too much, because another engine is readily available. But I do those searches simultaneously. It's very annoying for you to get a car, even though it's rare. It might be worth $200,000. It might be worth $1 million when it's finished. But if you can't find that engine, if you can't find the transmission, then it's worth nothing. Maybe you've already spent a lot of money, and you're stuck having to wait a long time, sometimes maybe years, trying to find the part for that car. So once again, another general concept is these cars, they're only worth a lot if they're finished. If they're halfway done, then the price depreciates quite significantly. So once again, I'm always trying to get cars that are complete, and those are the best deals as well. Unless you've got millions, I'd stay away from any car that's halfway done. It's missing half of it. That being said, one of the things that I least care about is the body. If it's full of rust, if the body's full of rust, but mechanical is all there, it likely is a good deal. So I guess that leads me to the first test for the inspection. Classic cars, they used to have the sheet steel that was used to make them was much thicker than the sheet steel used today. So a lot of times you'll find a car that's completely brown. It's completely brown from rust. And a lot of people think, "Well, that's really bad. I'll stay away from that car." But in these cases, all it needs is a good sanding, with maybe a wire wheel and some rust remover, and they're fine, perfectly fine. And the way you can know, you can separate a good body from a bad body is by mechanical force. So I like to walk around with a hammer, or even just tap it, or just push it down. If I can comfortably put my weight on it, and it doesn't give in, it doesn't get squashed, it doesn't dent, and that's still a good piece of sheet steel there. If I tap it with a hammer and I poke holes right through it, or I just tap on it, and this feels solid, I can punch my car through. But if at some point it's just squashing right through, then it's that's bad. It's very rare to get a car where the whole thing is like that. In most cases, you've got maybe a hole here or a hole there, and overall surface rust. But basically, you've got to think that all those holes you have to repair with welding. Whereas if it's just surface rust, you can just clean it off pretty much, right? So I've done cars where the whole fender was missing, and it's a lot of work making a fender. So once again, you also have to think about availability of parts. I guess this is sort of overlapping with the quote guide video. But that's how I inspect the bodywork. You can also use a magnet to identify parts where there was too much body filler used. The second major thing that I'll look for is the glass. If any of the glass is missing, it could be a deal breaker. If the glass is curved, if the windshield and the glass are just flat, which is the case of the windows on this car, then that's okay, because you can just get any piece of flat glass and cut it. It's not really a big deal. But if any of the curved glass, such as the windshield, is missing and they are hard to find, then you probably have to spend a few $1,000s on getting a custom windshield made. But once again, that could be something that will cause you to step away from that deal. Even if the whole car is fine, right? Even if the whole car is fine, no rust and everything mechanically fine, if it's missing a windshield and it costs $10,000 for you to get a new one, then you're probably not going to be able to drive the car. So that's one thing. I also look around for chrome. Chroming is very expensive. If all the chrome is badly rusted, and you either have to re-chrome it or have to make stainless steel chrome, which I can do, but it's kind of expensive. It's really expensive actually. In this particular car, you also want to think, I always like to think this way. Whenever I'm buying a car, thinking of buying a car, you're always viewing that car as a money pit. Something that's going to suck the blood, suck the money out of you. And the person selling the car is your personal enemy. It's a thief, somebody trying to rip you off. Obviously, I don't treat people like that, but that's how you have to think. So, if I was a thief, what would I do? And I do just what these people actually did on my car. They always hide things where you can't see them. So they'll make everything look nice, but a month later, it's all falling apart. So in this particular case, this car, but this applies to most cars. What you want to do is put your hands in underneath here, and you can feel and you can look at the inner fenders. And under these fenders here is where a lot of times there's rust, big holes, and outside you can't see it. It looks fine. But once again, these aren't things that are too hard to fix, but it all adds up. So that's where you really want to, where I'd like to check those things. Second, the other thing that I'd like to check is, are any major body parts missing? Are you missing a door? It's going to be very difficult to drive and use the car if one of the doors is missing. And some people have this idea of getting two parts cars that are the same, and from the two of them just make one that's useful. And that sometimes is really good. If you have more than one person that uses cars with you, it's always a good idea to have the same car. Both people have the same car, and that's really good if both cars are good quality, right? If you get two cars that are the same and they're garbage, then both of them will have the same problems. That's obviously not good. But it is indeed a good idea to have two cars so that you can interchange parts if you have to. But that being said, some people also do sometimes, they'll create Frankenstein cars, and that usually isn't good. So you're using a chassis from one car, putting it, with the suspension of another car, and then you create a car made from various different cars. And that might be good, and that might not be good. It can be very confusing for anyone else that doesn't know what you did and they're trying to find replacement parts. So let's say you have a Ford axle in a Dodge truck, for example, and then one day you have to change the brake pads and you're looking for Ford brake pads, but you actually have Dodge brake pads, but you actually have a Ford axle in there, so you actually have to look for Ford brake pads. And that can be confusing if you don't know what you're doing, and also depreciates the value of the car. Usually original cars that are maintained originally are worth more. That being said, since I actually use my car, I always like to look for the best possible designs, and I like to fix any flaws that the manufacturer has left. So, for example, this right here, which is actually a scrap pile now, is a pipe that was used to connect the cylinder head to the heater core. So the coolant will actually flow through here to the heater core. As you can see, this is a piece made of steel, and it's still very, very sturdy, even though it's over 50 years old. But it's kind of rusted, and it will begin to seize inside there. So I replaced it with brass, which is not originally what the manufacturers used, but brass is much better than steel for this application. So, For me, it's a simple no-brainer. I've got no second thoughts, no doubts about it. I've done that. I've replaced that part without any hesitation whatsoever. Um, that will ensure, but that's something you might have to consider. If it's strict original car, then I wouldn't be able to do that. And some people are obsessed with taking their cars to shows, and in the car shows they will, competitions, classic car competitions, they will check, if part numbers match, if certain design things match. And in my case, they'd probably look at those brass fittings from Home Depot, and they wouldn't like that. I'd probably lose points on that. But once again, I don't care about winning a competition, originality competition. I care about winning a reliability competition. So for me, that was my decision there. The other thing that you will most likely have to do on a classic car is checking of all fluids, and this starts to get into what you have to do to be able to enjoy your car. So once again, if you're just buying a car that's already been restored, you're pretty much buying a brand new car. Maybe, especially if you're getting something that was, frames off restoration, rebuilt engine, rebuilt transmission. The whole car, even though it's rebuilt, the whole car is rebuilt. Even though it's 50 years old, it's coming to you, it's arriving to you with pretty much as a baby. It's 0 years old, and ideally you want to sort of aim for that. Whether you're doing it yourself or you're paying somebody to do it, or you're buying the car that way, that's how that's my ultimate goal. That should be your ultimate goal, to get a brand new car. But at the same time, if you're trying to save some money, you're trying to stay away from any frames off restoration, because it will cost quite very significantly more. So you're trying to stay away from unnecessary repairs. That is true. Lots of places they'll rip you off with rebuilding and redoing things, replacing things that aren't necessary, that you don't need to replace. 99% of cases, you don't need to replace an engine. I had the unfortunate necessity of having to replace the engine, but if you do have to replace an engine, most cases it's still worth it. Obviously, depends how much, what people consider to be worth. I've come across people that are thinking that they're going to repair one of these cars. They come to me with a half-built car, and they think that they're going to get the whole car, frames off, restored for $1,000. Well, that's not happening. If that's not worth it to you, then it isn't worth it for you, right? So, like I said, I always try to get a car that's complete. For me, that's a must. If there are holes on the floor, holes on the body, I don't care, because anybody can weld. When you start to go into replacing mechanical parts, there might be a lot of research and a lot more cost involved. A sheet of steel over here costs $60. It's not really a lot. A 5x10 sheet costs about $60, and I can probably use the whole sheet of that for a whole car, so it doesn't cost a lot. My advice is to try to do everything that you have at once. It's very tempting, at least for me, to fix only whatever I really, really have to and drive the car that way. But then when I was driving the car like that, I'm always in the back of my mind worried, because I know that there's something there that might break. And if you're as unlucky as I am, then it will break. So, whenever possible, just be patient and fix everything that you have to, so that you can drive with 100%, complete peace of mind. It's a very, very good feel. When I first drove my car, I as soon as I get in the car, I'd be anxious, I'd be afraid, I'd be preparing for things, and I'd take tools and always preparing, expecting the inevitable. you know, it's still expected. And I finally learned my lesson, and you want to stay away from that. So, what are the things that you really have to do to guarantee that you're driving a nice car and you're going to have a good experience? You know, I've heard people saying, well, you have to. These cars require a lot of maintenance, and you have to be fixing them all the time. Well, that might be true if you're just fixing one thing at once, and you've got a car that hasn't been maintained, hasn't been looked after for 40 years. Well, what are you expecting? You're expecting everything to be like brand new. You have to change the oil, you have to change some brake pads. That's regular maintenance. It's impossible for you to have any lifetime warranty brake pads, although it is pretty close. It is theoretically pretty close to get to that, but I've never seen it on a passenger vehicle. So with all that being said, you're trying to do everything at once. So here's a small list of things that you really have to do and check, that I really have to do and check. Checking of all fluids. So I guess it's a mechanic's instinct, and the first thing you check, that I check when buying a car, or when I'm fixing my car, maintaining my car, is engine oil. I want to make sure that the engine oil there is clean. Maybe I'll do an engine flush, remove the whatever covers I have. We have valve covers. Remove them and clean off any pieces of dirt, pieces of stuck oil. What happens is when oil gets too old, it'll harden into solid pieces, and that's bad. So it doesn't hurt to change the oil. I'd like to check the coolant level. Coolant. If you're leaking coolant somewhere from a bad hose or something like that, you can lose the car. You can have catastrophic failure from anything simple to do with the engine. And sometimes all it is just a rusted hose clamp. A hose clamp can destroy your engine. A rotted hose clamp can destroy your engine. How could that happen? Well, let's say you're driving along, and then that rusted hose that you decided not to replace because you didn't have the patience, and you didn't want to spend the extra $1, and then you're driving, and then that hose clamp breaks off. Then the coolant hose, slides off from its connector. Coolant starts leaking everywhere, but then you don't know that's happening, and the engine starts to heat up, but you don't know that's happening because your temperature gauge isn't working. Well, then you're driving along, and you think, the engine starts, the car starts to, to become hard to drive. It's sort of stopping, and you think, well, it's just an old car, that's the way it is, and then your engine is seized, all because of a stupid hose clamp that wasn't replaced. So everything like that. And my advice, one lesson that I learned is, when in doubt, fix it. If something sort of looks good, but you're not sure, just fix it, replace it if you have to. Make it so that it's 100% certain to be reliable and good. I can't sleep at night, and I can't have a nice drive if I'm worried about things that could go wrong. When I get into my car, I want to make sure, in the back of my mind, everything is in good shape. I'm not going to have any major issues. Right, some things aren't that bad. Like, I have part of a spring here that's broken, so the car is sort of tilted, the front is sort of tilted to one side. That's not such a big deal, although I still want to replace it eventually. So the next fluid, the other fluid that you have to check, engine oil, coolant. You have to check the oil level in the transmission. Is the transmission full of oil? If it is, you still want to remove the drain plug, drain out the old oil, because it's probably already full of junk and garbage in there. You want to put some new gear oil in there. Differential, same thing.